People always say a mother's love is unconditional. I used to believe that. Growing up, I made excuses every time my parents chose my younger sister, Olivia, over me. If she forgot her homework, they rushed across town to bring it to school. If she had a bad day at work, they canceled family plans to comfort her. When I graduated college with honors, they arrived halfway through the ceremony because Olivia had argued with her boyfriend. "It's just who she is," my mom would always say. "She needs us more." I convinced myself that one day things would change. They never did. At 34, I had built a quiet life for myself in Seattle. I worked as a senior software engineer, owned a modest condo, and surrounded myself with friends who felt more like family than my own relatives. I still called my parents every Sunday, even though most conversations lasted less than 5 minutes before Mom started talking about Olivia's latest crisis. That Tuesday began like any other. I grabbed coffee before work, joked with my coworkers, and settled into a long morning of meetings. Around lunchtime, a sharp pain spread across my abdomen. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was stress or something I had eaten. Within an hour, the pain became unbearable. Sweat rolled down my forehead as the room seemed to tilt. My manager looked at me with concern. "Ethan, you don't look okay." Before I could answer, my knees buckled. The next thing I remembered was opening my eyes beneath bright hospital lights. Machines beeped steadily around me. A nurse adjusted my blanket before noticing I was awake. "Welcome back," she said gently. "You gave everyone quite a scare." My throat felt dry. "What happened?" "You collapsed at work. The doctors are running tests now." Hours later, the emergency physician returned with a serious expression. "We've identified the source of the problem," he explained. "You're experiencing severe internal bleeding. We need surgery as soon as possible." My heart pounded. "Is it dangerous?" He didn't sugarcoat the truth. "It is serious. Our team is prepared, but I want you to understand the risks." For the first time in years, I felt like a frightened little boy instead of a grown man. When the doctor left, silence filled the room. The nurse asked softly, "Is there anyone you'd like us to call?" Without thinking, I answered, "My parents." She handed me my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed Mom's number. She answered on the third ring. "Ethan, I'm a little busy." "Mom." My voice cracked. "I'm in the hospital." A pause. "What happened?" "I collapsed at work. The doctors say I need emergency surgery. They aren't sure." I swallowed hard. "They aren't sure how it's going to go." For a brief moment, I thought she'd say she was already on her way. Instead, I heard Olivia crying dramatically in the background. Mom sighed. "Oh, honey, this is terrible timing." I frowned. "What? Your sister is having another breakdown. Daniel left her this morning. She's completely devastated." I stared at the ceiling, unable to process what I was hearing. "Mom, I might not survive this surgery." Another pause, then came the words that shattered something inside me forever. "Your sister needs us more right now. We'll come see you after things settle down." I couldn't speak. My father took the phone for only a second. "Stay strong, son. We'll check on you later." The call ended. "No, I love you." "No, we're coming." "Nothing." I lowered the phone slowly, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The nurse had heard enough to understand. Without saying a word, she gently squeezed my shoulder before leaving to give me privacy. A few minutes later, my best friend Noah rushed into the room, still wearing his work badge. His face was pale with worry. I got here as fast as I could. Seeing him standing there, when my own parents wouldn't, nearly broke me. As the surgical team prepared to wheel me toward the operating room, I reached for the notebook beside my bed. With shaking hands, I wrote a single page, folded it carefully, and sealed it inside an envelope. Across the front, I wrote 5 words that made my own chest tighten. "Open only if I don't make it." As the orderly pushed my bed toward the operating room, I looked up at the bright ceiling lights and whispered a silent goodbye, not because I had given up hope, but because I finally understood a painful truth. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the very ones who leave you to face your darkest moment alone. When I opened my eyes again, everything was blurry. The white ceiling above me slowly came into focus, followed by the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. My throat burned from the breathing tube that had already been removed, and every inch of my body felt heavy. For a few seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back, the emergency surgery. The phone call, my mother's words, "Your sister needs us more right now." A nurse noticed I was awake and smiled warmly. "Welcome back, Ethan. Surgery went well." I blinked slowly. I made it. "You certainly did. The doctors were able to stop the bleeding. You'll have a long recovery ahead, but you're going to be okay." Relief washed over me, followed almost instantly by sadness. I had survived. Yet the first people I wanted to tell weren't there. Instead, Noah was asleep in the chair beside my bed, his head resting awkwardly against the wall. An untouched coffee sat on the table, and his jacket was draped over his knees. Judging by the dark circles under his eyes, he hadn't left my side. When he heard me stir, he jumped awake. "Ethan," his face lit up with genuine happiness. "You scared the life out of me." I managed a weak smile. "Looks like I'm harder to get rid of than you thought." He laughed, though his eyes filled with tears. "You idiot." For the next hour, Noah updated me on everything. The surgery had lasted nearly 6 hours. The doctors had warned him that the first 24 hours would be critical. He had called my parents several times, but none of his calls had been answered. They texted once. Noah admitted reluctantly. I frowned. What did they say? He hesitated before handing me his phone. The message read, "How is Ethan? We can't talk right now. Olivia is having a really difficult day." That was it. No concern, no questions for the doctors, no plans to visit. I handed the phone back without saying a word. Something inside me had gone strangely quiet, not angry, not even surprised, just finished. Over the next 3 days, I slowly regained my strength. Physical therapists helped me walk again. Nurses checked on me constantly, and Noah somehow balanced his job while spending every evening in my hospital room. My parents never came. On the afternoon of the 4th day, just as I was practicing walking down the hallway, I saw 2 familiar faces approaching. Mom and Dad. My heart didn't race the way it once would have. Instead, I simply watched them. Mom hurried over and hugged me carefully. "Oh, sweetheart, you look so much better." Dad patted my shoulder. "We knew you'd pull through." I waited. Neither of them apologized. Instead, Mom sighed dramatically. "You have no idea how stressful this week has been." I stared at her. "Really?" She nodded. "Olivia has barely stopped crying. We've been completely exhausted trying to help her." I looked from my mother to my father. Neither seemed to realize what they were saying. Dad even added, "Hospitals make your mother nervous anyway." That sentence settled something deep inside me. For years, I'd searched for excuses to explain why I always came second. There weren't any. It was simply a choice they kept making. Later that evening, after they left with promises to visit again soon, I asked Noah to bring me the envelope I'd written before surgery. He retrieved it from the hospital safe, the words "open only if I don't make it" stared back at me. I smiled sadly. "I guess this isn't needed anymore." Noah shook his head. "I think it still matters." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You wrote that believing those might be your last words. That's the most honest thing you've ever written." He was right. Instead of throwing it away, I slipped the letter into a new envelope and wrote different instructions across the front. "Deliver only when I say the time is right." A week later, after I was discharged, I visited an attorney recommended by Noah. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained everything. "I don't want revenge," I said quietly. "I just want the truth to reach them one day." The attorney placed the envelope inside my file. "It will stay exactly where you want it until you tell me otherwise." As I walked out of his office, I made another decision. I stopped calling my parents. I stopped sending birthday cards. I stopped checking whether they had finally realized what they had done. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them to choose me. I was finally choosing myself. I didn't know it yet, but that single decision would become the beginning of everything they would one day regret. 3 years passed without a single phone call from me. At first, I expected my parents to notice my silence. I imagined Mom calling to ask why I had disappeared or Dad showing up at my condo to make sure I was okay. Neither happened. The only messages I received were generic holiday texts sent to everyone in the family group chat. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy Birthday. Each one felt less like love and more like an obligation. Eventually, I stopped replying altogether. Instead of dwelling on what I'd lost, I poured my energy into rebuilding my life. Recovering from the surgery had taught me something priceless. Tomorrow was never guaranteed. If I was fortunate enough to have a second chance, I wasn't going to waste it chasing people who had never made me a priority. I left my comfortable corporate job and partnered with Noah to develop software that helped small hospitals manage emergency patient records more efficiently. We worked long days and countless weekends, surviving on takeout dinners and stubborn determination. There were moments when we nearly gave up. Investors rejected us. A major client backed out at the last minute. More than once, we questioned whether we were making the biggest mistake of our lives. But we kept going. 3 years later, everything changed. A national healthcare company offered to acquire our software for an amount neither of us had ever imagined. After taxes and expenses, my share was worth several $1,000,000. News spread faster than I expected. A local business magazine published an interview about our company, complete with a smiling photo of Noah and me standing in our office. 2 days later, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before answering. Ethan. She exclaimed cheerfully, as though we'd spoken yesterday. We just saw your interview. We're so proud of you. I said nothing. She continued awkwardly. We've been meaning to reconnect. Families shouldn't drift apart. Before I could respond, Dad's voice came through the speaker. We'd love to see you this weekend. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was painfully predictable. After 3 years of silence, they suddenly remembered they had a son. I agreed to dinner, not because I believed things had changed, because I wanted to hear the truth with my own ears. We met at an expensive restaurant overlooking the waterfront. Mom hugged me tightly for the first time in years. Dad smiled wider than I'd seen since I was a teenager. For nearly 30 minutes, they asked about my company, my house, my vacations, and my future plans. Not once did they ask how I'd felt after they abandoned me in the hospital. Finally, Mom reached across the table. Ethan, there's something we need to discuss. There it was. Olivia had started another business, she explained. She had borrowed heavily, convinced success was just around the corner. Instead, the company failed within a year, leaving her buried in debt. Collectors were calling daily. She was on the verge of losing her home. Dad cleared his throat. You're in a position to help. Mom squeezed my hand. Families take care of each other. The words echoed in my mind. Families take care of each other. 3 years earlier, I had begged for nothing more than their presence, while I lay in a hospital bed wondering if I would survive the night. Back then, family hadn't seemed quite so important. I smiled politely, I understand. Relief flooded across both of their faces. Mom even began discussing payment plans before I'd agreed to anything. Instead, I interrupted gently. Why don't you come to my house tomorrow afternoon? I'd rather talk somewhere private. They exchanged excited glances. I'm sure we can figure something out, Dad said confidently. The next afternoon, they arrived dressed as though they were celebrating a holiday. Mom carried homemade cookies. Dad brought an expensive bottle of wine. For anyone watching, we looked like the perfect family. Inside my living room, I invited them to sit. Then I walked to my desk. From the top drawer, I removed a sealed envelope that had remained untouched for 3 years. Across the front were the faded words I had written with trembling hands before emergency surgery. Open only if I don't make it. I placed it quietly on the coffee table between us. I said calmly, it's finally time for you to read what I wrote on the day you decided someone else needed you more than your dying son. The smiles disappeared from their faces as my mother slowly reached for the envelope. unaware that the few pages inside would change the way they saw themselves forever. My mother stared at the envelope for several seconds before carefully breaking the seal. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. My father leaned closer as she unfolded the single handwritten page. I recognized every word instantly. I had written them believing they might be my last. Mom began reading aloud, but her voice trembled after the first few lines. If you're reading this because I didn't survive, please don't blame yourselves for my illness. Life can change in a single moment, but I hope you remember one thing, not how I died, but how alone I felt before I went into surgery. Her eyes filled with tears, she continued. I called because I wasn't looking for a miracle. I wasn't asking anyone to save me. I just wanted my mom and dad to hold my hand one last time. Instead, I learned that I had already lost you long before I entered that operating room. Dad lowered his head. The confidence he'd carried into my house vanished. Mom struggled to finish. If I survive, I won't spend the rest of my life begging to be loved. I'll build a life surrounded by people who choose me willingly. And if one day you come looking for me only because you need something, you'll already know my answer. The paper slipped from her hands. She covered her face and sobbed. I didn't know, she whispered. I looked at her calmly. You knew I was having emergency surgery. She shook her head desperately. I didn't think it was that serious. The doctors told you it was. I thought there would be more time. I nodded slowly. So did I. My father finally spoke. We failed you. Those 3 words carried more honesty than anything I'd heard from him in years. I've replayed that phone call 1,000 times, he admitted. Every day I wish we'd gotten into the car. But you didn't. He closed his eyes. No. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, my mother reached across the table. Ethan, please forgive us. I took a slow breath before answering. I forgave you a long time ago. Both of them looked relieved. Then I continued. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. Their expressions fell. I don't hate either of you. I said, hating you would mean letting that day control my life forever. I let it go because I wanted peace. But peace doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. Mom quietly cried. I missed birthdays, holidays, promotions, the biggest moments of your life. Yes, I answered softly. Those were choices. Dad wiped his eyes. We came today because Olivia is drowning in debt. I know. We hoped you'd help. I stood and walked to the large window overlooking the city. When I needed my family, you told me someone else needed you more. I turned back toward them. Today, Olivia needs you more. Neither of them could respond. I'm not giving you money, I said gently. Not because I want revenge, but because rescuing her has been your answer to every problem for decades. If I write that check, nothing changes. She never learns responsibility, and you never stop sacrificing everything for her. Mom nodded through her tears. For the first time, she didn't argue. She simply accepted the truth. As they prepared to leave, Dad stopped at the front door. I'm proud of the man you've become. A younger version of me would have waited years to hear those words. Now, they simply arrived too late. Thank you, I replied. After they left, Noah came over that evening. How did it go? He asked. I smiled, not with triumph, but with relief. I finally said everything I needed to say. A few months later, Noah and I launched a charitable foundation that helped patients facing medical emergencies without family support. Every grant reminded me that no one should face their darkest day alone. News of the foundation spread across the country, inspiring donations from strangers who believed in its mission. My parents attended the foundation's first public fundraiser. They didn't ask for recognition or another chance. Instead, they quietly donated what they could and left before the cameras arrived. It didn't erase the past. Nothing ever could. But it showed they had finally begun to understand. As for me, I placed the original letter and my faded hospital bracelet into a small wooden memory box. I closed the lid with a smile. That letter had once been written in fear. Now it stood as proof of something far greater. The greatest revenge was never making my family suffer. It was building a life so full of purpose, love, loyal friends, and inner peace that the people who abandoned me could only look back and realize they had willingly walked away from the best part of their own family. In this time, I never looked back.